Hello and welcome to the next episode of The Talking Tradesman. Today we have James Reeve from Royal Spa. I was looking for the name on your top there, mate. We
Bit of
have,
a mouthful.
from Royal Spa Decorating Limited.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah, so welcome, James. Let's
Thank you for
talk.
having me.
You're very welcome, mate. Thanks for coming over, first of all.
Pleasure.
Appreciate the effort in you coming over today. So yeah, we'll as with any good story, mate, I think the best way to do that is to start at the beginning, isn't it? So you're a fellow painter and decorator.
I am, for all my sins, yeah, unfortunately.
There we go. I've already told James that he's not allowed to evaluate the decorating in our humble studio today. So yeah, we'll start at the beginning if that's all right, mate. How long have you been in the trade?
So I started painting when I was 16, so it'll be 17 years this year since I started. And to be honest, I fell into decorating just by accident, really. I don't know how did you start?
To be fair, mate, at 16, I was adamant I was not going to. I'm third generation, so my granddad was a decorator. Right, okay. So at 16, I was adamant there was no way I was going to be a decorator. I worked on the agency and did a load of heavy lifting jobs because they paid better for a year, and then decided actually decorating's pretty good.
I mean, there's definitely worse things to be done. But yeah, I fell into it completely by accident. Really, I left school at 16 and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I toyed with the idea of going into the army originally, just because I had, to be honest, I had no real direction in my life.
Okay.
And I didn't really know what I want. I mean, I guess a lot of people don't really know what they want to do. Does anyone know what they want to do for the rest of their life when they're 15, 16?
Well, mate, I'm turning 40 this year and I haven't got a clue what I want to do. So, yeah, I don't think you ever really know.
I think you do. So, to cut a long story short, I left school at 16, didn't really excel academically. And I think my mum kind of just said to me, like, you can't be sitting around the house. You need to kind of go and get a job and start earning money. And it was kind of just a family friend that had his own firm or whatever, and she was like, just go and see if he'll, just do some labouring for him and just see if he'll, like, take you on, or and it kind of just went on from there. And to be honest with you, I just ended up falling in love with decorating, and I stuck with it. So
nice.
So it's still here now. Yeah.
So did you do like an old-fashioned apprenticeship, or did you do a college apprenticeship?
Yeah. So I went to college and I did what was then like a City and Guilds apprenticeship.
Yeah.
Level 2 or level 3 or whatever it would have been then. I know now the standard has slightly changed in that they do like a, the NVQ equivalent or whatever. So the young lads that work for me, they have like I think it's level 3 NVQ, whereas what we did back in my day was the City and Guilds. But it's basically the same thing, which is go to college 1 day a week, and for the rest of the time you're on site doing your training or whatever. So
it's cool that you've done that, though. It's kind of gone full circle now, hasn't it? So you've done your apprenticeship and now you've got apprentices on. It's good that you've done the whole process yourself, and now you can coach them.
It's definitely nice. It's nice. It's nice being able to pass stuff on to the next generation. And even though I'm not quite at retirement age yet, it does make me feel quite old just even saying those words. But yeah, it's nice to have those young lads and to coach them and show them not just the trade skills, but also, when you're sort of that age when they first come to you when they're 16, there's not really much life experience there. So you're also kind of teaching them, life skills as well, which is kind of quite nice, really.
There's a certain responsibility to it, isn't there? When you've got youngsters on, because you do, realistically, you're probably spending more time with them than their parents are at that age.
Well, we said this the other day, actually, when I was at work. I think if you spend kind of like 40 hours a week with one of the lads at work, chances are you're probably spending more time with them than you do probably with your missus. You know what I mean? By the time you've come home after work, had dinner and whatever else, you probably actually spend more time with the lads at work than you do with your own family. So I guess it is quite important to have like that good relationship with them.
Yeah, definitely, mate. And they're obviously lucky to have somebody that feels that way as well, that sort of knows that there's a responsibility there, rather than just using them as a tool.
I've got to be honest with you. My kind of like ethical approach to the way that I treat the people that work for me, including the apprentices, I think is probably been formed from my own bad experiences when I was younger. And so, like,
Okay.
I've probably worked for people who probably had the complete opposite approach in that. Not always. I have worked for some quite, some good guys as well. But I started my apprenticeship with one firm and I finished it with a different firm, and I did work for the people in between and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that was due to, at the time, the recession, and the firm that I was with originally went bust, and so I had to find somebody else for my second half of my apprenticeship. But not everyone that you come across has those kind of intentions, and a lot of people, especially when you're young, they just want to kind of use you as kind of cheap labour, don't they? So
yeah,
that can be, and I know what it's like. I know how daunting it is, kind of trying to approach someone and be like, basically, can I come work for you or whatever else. So I guess having had that experience, it's nice to be able to treat people the way that I would have liked to be treated. Do you know what I mean?
I think, to be fair, mate, that says a lot about you as a person, that you look at it that way, because I've seen it myself as well. And we as a company have had numerous youngsters on over the years, and I've felt the same thing. There's a responsibility to install some ethics as well as teaching them the trade. How to be as a person, or be as a man or a young lad. That there is a little bit. I think I've done it almost naturally without really thinking about it.
It's like a coaching. It's almost coaching, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. But it's, as you said, you don't get that everywhere. So I think, by the sounds of it, the lads that have found you have done a good job. So how many lads you got on at the moment?
So at the minute there is 5 of us on the tools, and we've got Hannah's in the office, and Emma that does the bookkeeping and stuff like that. But
fantastic.
So two of those lads are just about to finish they've done 3 years with their apprenticeship. They're just waiting for their endpoint assessment now.
Yeah.
And one of the lads is just coming in September, and he's 16, so he's fresh from school. Yeah.
Brilliant, mate. Well, it sounds like things are going well. I mean, obviously, the background of the Talking Tradesman podcast is to get people talking about mental health and that raise awareness of the issues within the construction industry. We were talking, obviously, pre-record about some of that, but the statistics are pretty horrendous. One of the things I didn't mention in our conversation before, because we were talking about the statistics, and I'll put those out there now because I think it's important to keep repeating those.
Yeah, of course.
And obviously you told me you're aware of these anyway, but 75% of all people that take their own lives are men. And if you're in the construction industry, the latest statistics I saw was that you're actually 4 times more likely to take your own life. So you're already 3 times more likely just by being male, and then you're 4 times more likely by being in the construction industry. And out of those figures as well, the 2, I don't know if you're aware of this one, but the 2 trades at the highest risk of taking their own lives are actually plasterers and painters and decorators.
Yeah, so it's really interesting hearing those statistics, as hard as it is to hear them, because I think even kind of 6 months ago, they were kind of on the border of changing. And I think perhaps in the last 6 months, unfortunately, that has actually increased. So it's gone from 3 to 4 times more likely.
Yeah.
And I did see figures from I think it was the Lighthouse, I think originally, who said it was more likely to be 4 than 3.
Yeah.
However, for it to now be published as 4 times more likely, it's an incredible statistic. And really, like you said, if you're a man, you're 75% more likely to take your own life. And then as someone who's working in the construction industry, you're then 4 times more likely. You just think of how high risk you are to be a male working within the construction industry. And it's quite scary, really, to think of, not only yourself, but all the people around you. And
absolutely.
And think, that statistic is crazy. It is really crazy.
It is. I think it is absolutely astounding. And I think so I knew a few things before I started the podcast. So I knew that the rates of suicide within the trades were the highest. But I didn't know how high. I didn't know how much of the building trades. And again, percentages, the figures that I've seen, and I might be wrong, so I'll just put this out there, but the research I've done, what I've found is 2 things. One, it's quite difficult to find accurate statistics.
Yeah.
In fact, I think the latest ONS study was 2015. So
it's going to be invariably, it's going to be out of date.
Yeah.
Really, yeah.
So it's very difficult, but the latest study, so the ONS study in 2015 found that, I think if I've got these figures correct, that what they termed as low skilled construction, so that's your labourers, your sort of your apprentices and that kind of element of the construction industry, made up either 16 or I think it was 18% of all male suicides. And your skilled trades made up either 26 or 29%. So either way, it's over 50% of that 75% that are men comes out of the construction industry. And that's a huge figure.
Of course, yeah, that's
absolutely massive.
It's crazy. And like you're saying, then it's obviously it's going to be hard for these statistics to be accurate because, like we said before we started recording, the kind of the circumstances now and the pressures that are in day-to-day life now are probably more significant than they were 9 years ago, 2015.
That's it.
So the cost of living crisis and bills and people not being able to, financial pressures make up a huge amount of strain on mental health in general, let alone suicide. So you bring that into the fact that you've got people working on these big sites.
Yeah.
Now a lot of them probably aren't going to have work. They're going to be, the phases are going to be halted, and these guys are going to be left without a steady income. And so, how is that not going to negatively affect someone's mental health? I don't know. If you, I'm fortunate in that we do a lot of domestic work and we do bits of kind of development work and stuff like that, but we're not solely dependent on the big development. So there are lads that that do this, the big sites, and they will just focus on doing that. And if the arse falls out of that tomorrow, what are you going to do? How are you going to put food on the table?
There's all these things, aren't there? I mean, one of the questions I was going to ask you today is what I'm interested in finding out from people is, why do you think that the construction industry has got such high figures? And the reason, before you go on, the reason why I wanted to ask that question is, at the same time as saying all these horrific statistics, I love the building trades, and I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't do another job. So I'm in a position where I couldn't see myself ever doing anything else, because we talk about these statistics and it kind of makes it sound like it's this horrific place to be. But most people you talk to love their trade. They love what they do for a living. But there are these figures that can't be ignored. Now, as I said before, I mean, why do you think that the building trades and the construction industry is so disproportionately affected in comparison to any other industry?
I mean, who am I to say? I couldn't give you an exact figure to that. But what I could say is that perhaps working in the construction industry, there are certain pressures. Perhaps the construction sector as a general, you're probably more likely to be self-employed than a lot of other sectors.
Yeah, I think it's about 50% of the figures.
So perhaps that has some sort of contribution towards it. But I think a lot of it as well is people's attitudes towards you. Again, like this thing about skilled labour, unskilled labour. I think a lot of people have this perception that they're happy to take what you have to give. So they want the skill that you can provide, but they don't necessarily want to pay the money or value the skill that you have. And so perhaps that does have a bit of an effect on people's mental well-being. And there's a lot of financial pressures. If you're self-employed and that you have to go to work, even if you've like broken your leg, or a lot of people can't afford to take time off. So again, having that pressure, and especially if you're you've got a family or whatever else, and even if you don't, even if you work for a company, there's also that pressure of like, I've got to make sure that I turn up to work, otherwise I'm not going to get paid. And and even the work that's seen as the kind of safe work that's on the sites and stuff like that. Like I said, I know people who all they do is site work. They don't do the kind of domestic stuff, and that's, until very recently, has always been viewed as the kind of the safe work, because it'll always be there. There's always going to be houses being built.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to people probably maybe even 6 months ago now, and them saying basically they turned up to work and the kind of gaffers just said, look, we're not doing the next phase. All that we're going to do is the kind of the social housing, because that's always going to be there. But
off you go, look after yourself.
Yeah, but basically we'll give you a call, like we'll call you, don't call us, kind of thing, and it's like
horrendous, isn't it?
And so how are you not supposed to take that in a, how are you not supposed to have that negatively impact your mental well-being? I don't know. But yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I don't know if there's been enough studies to kind of.
I don't think there has, and the reason I say that is because I would hope that if they could identify why, then there'd be action taken to do something about it, and because there isn't. There are some great charities out there. I'll mention a couple now. I'll mention Mind, that I know you're close to, and we'll touch more on that in a bit. There's Lighthouse, Samaritans. There's a numerous amount of charities out there, but ultimately they're charities. And to me, there should be something a bit more fundamental put in place to address what are quite startling and obvious figures. I mean, job security is obviously huge. My personal mindset with that, I remember, you're not far from here. You remember the Rover, as it were?
Yeah.
So I grew up just outside Birmingham, and a huge proportion of the local population would work at Rover, or the Rover, as it was always referred to. 4 or 5 generations of the family worked at the Rover, and then all of a sudden that went overnight. And when these big corporations and businesses started vanishing, at that point I thought to myself, well, it can happen to anyone.
Yeah, exactly.
And the way I actually looked at it was being self-employed and having a painting and decorating business myself. And we have pretty much, most of our demographic is domestic and high-end domestic these days. And I looked at that and I thought, well, actually, I'm probably more secure in that I might have 20 small jobs booked in. So if 1 or 2 of those cancel, I've still got the other 18, as opposed to having one contract for 6 months. And if that cancels, oh shit.
And you're able to forecast that as well, because know in your mind, what the work rate is that's ahead of you. When you can sit. Whereas if you work for one of these big companies, it would just be a case of turning up one day and them saying, "Sorry, lads, we haven't got any more work for you."
There's no control, is there, to that?
And do you know what? Even now, like this is. I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, there's obviously, like you're saying, the Rover. There was Peugeot was in Coventry. That's obviously all houses now. That was a massive plant. We had in Leamington. When I was younger, a lot of those generations of people that worked for Ford. And basically, once the Ford factory closed, that was again all these people without jobs and whatever else. And it's happening again now. I mean, you go to the high street and places like Wilko's. It's like if they can't survive, they can't pay the rent on these shops, they can't make a profit, then how are all these other smaller businesses expected to keep going when the big boys can't do it?
I think it's been happening generationally for years, hasn't it? I mean, you look at the up north with the mines and the coal industry, and so it's happened for a long time with security, with people that think that you're secure in your job, and ultimately the realization is actually it could be pulled out from under your feet tomorrow, and the person that cares about you is only you. It's the owners of these big companies. They're not thinking about your family and how they're going to eat or pay the mortgage. So I like that element of control, because I feel like I'm master of my own destiny, in terms of I've got the ability, if I need more work, to go and hunt it, to take more work on if I need to. So I actually like that element, and I think that's just how I've adjusted my mindset to the job security element of things. However, I think it's a double-edged sword, so it's got a little bit of a danger element to it, in that there's no HR departments, there's nobody checking in on you going, do you know what, James, you've worked 80 hours this week, mate. You're looking a bit worn out. There's nobody to stop you or hold you back. Family do, to an extent, but normally it's that family that you're actually doing those hours for.
Yeah, of course.
So
that can be, do you know what, that in itself can be the hardest thing for someone like yourself or me to wrap your mind around, which is that kind of the balance in life, in that you're working all these hours because you want to support your family, and inevitably you are supporting them. However, once you go beyond a certain amount and you're never there, you're almost being, what you're doing, all your efforts are then counterproductive.
Yeah.
So it's a very hard line to walk. And again, perhaps this could contribute towards why people are taking their own lives, because they're missing out on that time with their family. They feel like they're working, impossible hours to provide for families that they don't spend any time with, and that is a very hard thing to come to terms with.
It's huge, mate. Yeah, and I think probably everybody in the trades, any trade that's listening to this podcast, will be able to identify with that struggle to find the balance of doing enough work to provide a good life, and also then being able to enjoy the time that. So my conclusion, I went through this stage where I was looking for like the equation, like how do you get happy? Like, what is happiness?
Well, if you find it, you got to let me know.
Mate, well, the closest I got to it. Now, I studied Buddhism, I studied all sorts of things to try and sort of get to even a definition of what it was.
Yeah.
And the closest thing I could find was that happiness comes from living life in accordance to your values. The problem with that is most people, I believe, don't know what their values are. So when you sit down and you work it out, it's like, well, what are my values? Is that spending time with your family, watching your kids grow up, and all those kind of things, which are generically the things that people are going to say. If your value is consisted in growing a business, then great, fantastic. But so many people, I think, are told what their values are rather than finding it themselves.
And again, this is another thing that is more widespread than just trades. I think it's the whole of society, and perhaps the majority of mankind, is that we're constantly trying to, we're in this kind of consumerism, and we're chasing that, and basically what we're sort of taught to believe is we have these goals in life, and that once we attain these goals, and then we'll be happy. So we have, for instance, like, the job, the house, the car, the family, and it's almost like a shopping list of stuff that people think, well, like, my life isn't great now, but I'm going to work my arse off for the next 2 years, and I'm going to get that car, or I'm going to get that job, I'm going to get that house. And once I get there, then I'll be happy. And I refer to this as like destination living. And I've definitely been guilty of this in the past. I've just thought, once by the time I'm 30, I want to have my own house, I want the business to be successful, I want to have a nice car. And, and then you get there and you're like, well, this is great, but I'm actually not any more happier in myself than I was. And a great way I heard it put before is, don't search for happiness, learn to be content. And I think that's a very powerful saying, in that, this search for happiness, the idea that this life is a shopping list, and that if you do all these things, then you will become happy. Happiness, in a way, it is just learning to be content. And I've met people who have very little material objects to their name. They don't have a lot of, financial well-being, but they're happy with what they've got. They're content. And I think that is really the goal in life, I think, now for me.
Right. You're dropping some bombs there. There's some knowledge in that. I love what you've just said, to be fair, because it rings true to a lot of what the conclusions I've come to. And I'm not here today to talk about me in particular. I want to get into your story. But I did that. I lived that life. I did the stereotypical 2.4 kids, house, car, because society told me that was what you do. And like you said, then you achieve those things, and then you stand back and you go, okay, well, I'm happy now then. And you're like, well, but I'm not. So what's wrong? What's missing? And then you start to doubt yourself and think, is it me? Is there something wrong with me? Because I've ticked all these boxes I'm told to tick, and yet I feel no different to how I felt before. So yeah, what you've just said, mate, there is bang on. So yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that no one, one thing that I've definitely learned from my kind of journey into like mental well-being, not just mental health, is that, is to accept that you're never the finished article, and that you can always improve. Only someone who's very naive or very stupid thinks that they're the finished article. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And this is my resolution. I mean, I don't usually make New Year's resolutions, but this year my resolution is to.
You're putting this on record now,
I know.
mate,
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, if I'm not a millionaire by now, I mean, so this year, my sort of goal isn't to have these grand things about I'm gonna be a millionaire by June or whatever. I think my sort of goals last year, I'd say goals were to invest everything that I had back into my business in order to try and to grow and to get to a stage where things were better, functioning better, and that was not just improving in tools and stuff like that, but sort of training program and stuff like this. So this year, my goal is to invest back in myself, and I've spoken about this before, but what I really want to do is go back to thinking about not just everybody else around me, which it sounds a very selfish thing to say, but
no.
You can, especially, I mean, this sounds very old fashioned, but as a man, if you're a family man, it's very easy to fall into that trap of, basically you go through the motion of going to work, looking after the people around you, and you don't actually really take a minute to look back at yourself and think, am I who I want to be? Am I doing things that make me happy? And it's very easy to then become, a year's gone by, the weeks, the months, the years, and I'm not where I wanted to be. I'm not where I thought I would be.
Yeah.
This year, what I want to do is I'm going to focus on my own growth and my own well-being. And I'm very fortunate in the past when I had a full-on mental breakdown, I had access to resources and I was able to get counselling. Like we spoke about before, some people aren't lucky. They can't afford it, or they can't find a way in because waiting lists are so long.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate in that I got that help when I needed it, and potentially, that saved my life. And now I think what I need to do is recognise that, no one is the finished article, and I can't say, well, because I've been through this 2.5 years ago, now I'm the finished article and I can preach to everybody else about mental health, but I don't need to look at myself, because that's a very naive approach. I think I need to understand that in order to be the best version of myself, not only for myself, but for the people around me who then want to approach me and feel comfortable to talk to me about their problems with mental health or what they're going through, I need to be the best version of myself. And in order to do so, I need to constantly look at my own mental well-being and go through coaching and do whatever I can do to be the best version.
To be fair, James, I think that's a perfect view on it, because again, when you look at like recovery models and things like that, it's not a straight line. It's a wave. You're up, you're down, and the same thing when you've been through mental health adversity. It's the same. You're still going to have your downtimes, even when you've learnt the lessons and the coping mechanisms. It's still going to hit you. You're just going to recognise why.
Yeah,
and then you can process it better than you did before. But those times are still going to come. So taking that time to work on yourself, like you just said, the best version of you will give out the best, sort of like partner, the best father, the best boss, the best.
Exactly.
That is the best version of you is going to be the best thing for everybody around you. So you definitely have to take time to work on yourself. And there's the old saying, isn't there? You can't pour from an empty glass.
No, and you know what? As cliche as that is, there's very few expressions that relate to mental health that are so true. Like, how can you be, how can people approach you and say, look, I'm feeling a certain type of way, and me say, well, at the end of the day, I'm not a qualified professional. I've set out on a path of trying to help people where, as and when I can, but obviously the majority of that is trying to push people in the right direction to find the help that they need, and that's again is like we were talking about a minute ago, is to services that unfortunately that aren't publicly funded. They are charities and stuff like that. But again, I can't listen to people and advise. Be in a position. How can I advise someone and me not take my own advice? Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's easy to do that. I've fell into that trap before. When you're telling people the best way to do things, and see, at home, your life is, upside down. So it's an easy thing to do, and to reflect on yourself. It can be quite overwhelming trying to help everybody at the same time as helping yourself. So you do, like you say, sometimes have to step away and do that. But, to be honest with you, you sat here today opposite somebody who you've met, half an hour ago. We're both doing this for the same reason, which is to try and get people talking.
Yeah.
I've always felt that the first stage of trying to, start to push things upwards, that upwards trajectory, is to recognise that something's wrong, And I think there's a lot of men out there that will be stressed and feel the weight of the world on their shoulders and just feel that that's normal, and then feel that if they can't cope, then that means that there's something wrong with them, rather than there's something wrong with the situation and the pressure they're feeling.
Which again goes back to the adage about the education and people not recognising it because they haven't previously been aware that this is their problem, and that they weren't taught to behave a certain type of way. And again, going back to people, like my dad's generation, your dad's generation, this just wasn't a conversation that people were having. Does that mean that people didn't suffer with all these problems with mental health and high suicide and whatever? No, it doesn't. It just means that there was no one there to help them, and that is really sad. That is, and so anything that you can do, anything that we can do, anything that I can do to kind of change that is just by opening up a conversation is obviously valuable.
100%.
So again, this is a sweeping statement, but as a country, as a nation, as the whole world, we need to be teaching people at school about mental health, and about recognizing these things that could have a negative impact. Like we were talking about losing your job, the breakdown of a relationship. It can take something as it's not small, but it can take something as small as losing a job. Like you said, you've got 20 jobs lined up, 10 of them cancelled tomorrow because of all the rain, someone's flooded, and suddenly you're in a position where your head's in the shed and you're thinking, how am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to do that? And it's not something that's being taught.
It's not. And I think one of the things I believe, that as men, we actually have a responsibility to not only talk, but also learn to listen and learn to spot the signs. Most people, you've got friends, you've got family, you might have a brother, a partner, you might have friends, cousins, whatever it might be. I think as a society, again, what could really help is for people to be educated to the degree where they know that not only that if they're in a bad position that they should talk and open up, but also be there to listen, because listening is a huge skill.
You know what, that is such a powerful statement, because like that really hit me like a freight train when you said that, because that's so true. Like we always talk about in this sector, there's a lot of talk about people saying you need to learn to talk, but you know what, if without someone there to listen, it doesn't matter, does it?
Exactly.
Really?
Yeah,
it doesn't.
And I certainly found myself when I had sort of hard times, probably in that position where, and part of it was my own mindset, where I thought nobody will want to listen to that. I'll just mask it. I'll just get on with it. That's what I do. But at the same time, if I'd have thought deeply about it and thought, is there really anybody that I think is going to listen to me the way that I need to be heard in that moment? Maybe not. So I think really, if collectively, and certainly everyone listening to this and people in the construction industry, to take this stuff seriously and realise that it is a massive problem, it's not getting better, and that sometimes just doing something very small can make a big difference. You don't have to go and start a podcast. You don't have to go on a podcast. You don't have to talk about your own problems if you don't want, because I know people struggle with that. But even if you can just learn to be a good listener, it's going to make a huge difference.
In a way, is actually, I guess it's a bit of a chicken and the egg situation, but in a way, if the world was full of listeners, then perhaps there wouldn't be as much of a fear of talking. You understand what I'm saying? So it's an amazingly powerful thing you just said, and it's something that, in the way that you just put it, is probably not something that I've personally thought about it that way. So that's an interesting thing to hear. But Yeah, I mean, obviously, if we can be there for the people around us that we care about, whether you said like your partners, your friends, people, colleagues at work or whatever, and just learn to listen and learn to be more receptive to when people want to open up that conversation to you, and just to not to just shut it down, because again, that is what the fear is of when people don't want to talk, because they have that fear of being shut down or not heard. And so if we can learn to listen, then that's a huge thing.
It is. I mean, my own personal insight into that is probably no more than 18 months, 12 months, 12 months old, where through my work, where I've been volunteering with Samaritans, I've firsthand seen a lot of the power of listening, because at Samaritans, one of the things, and one of the training's fantastic, one of the things with Samaritans is you're not there to tell people what to do. And there were a lot of preconceptions before I started doing it, where I assumed what a Samaritan would do. But effectively, you are literally just there to listen and empathise and help people organise their thoughts. You don't tell people what to do. You don't sort of sit there and go, well, have you tried this, or should you do that?
Judgment on people.
No, not at all. And it's a strange one, this. It was probably the thing I struggled to take on board initially the most, which they have a policy called what they call self-determination. And I think it's important to mention this, because self-determination refers to people who are in a position where they might want to take their own life. And my initial thought was, okay, I'm going to volunteer as a Samaritan. If somebody rings up and tells me they're going to want to take their own life, I'm going to go, don't do that, mate. Don't do that because of this, or that's not what we do.
Right.
We listen to why and how they got to that position. And thankfully, through the power of just listening and having a conversation, a lot of the time that's enough to make a huge difference.
Yeah.
However, if somebody were in the position, and the reason I think it's important to say this is because if somebody were in a position where they are resigned to the fact that they are going to take their own life, if you ring Samaritans, you won't be talked out of it.
Yeah.
You will be allowed and respected to do what you're going to do. Obviously, Samaritans' entire purpose is to reduce the amount of people taking their own lives, and often just talking to somebody is enough to change. But I found it was very powerful. That
again, that's it's because they've had people like you at the other end of the phone. Do you understand what I'm saying? So there's a lot of people who don't have a support network. There's a lot of people who, even if they do have a support network, they're not people that they feel they can talk to. And so services like Samaritans are obviously so valuable, because it provides that no judgment zone where you can call and you can tell someone your deepest, darkest thoughts and your intentions on ending your own life, and someone's not there to judge you or make you feel a certain type of way. There to support you and, like you said, help order your thoughts. And that's a really amazing purpose.
It is, and the anonymous element of it, I think, helps. And the reason I want to highlight it, and I'm going to keep bringing up Samaritans on these podcasts, is because as a tradesperson and somebody that's taken the calls the other side and spoken to a lot of tradespeople, I believe that element, because there's still this conception, isn't there, of I'm a man, I'm not going to, if you're, say, in your position or my position where you're the head of the company, you're probably not going to talk to the lads that work for you. I don't know the relationship you've got with your lads. You might have some great friends. But there's also this kind of like hierarchy, the pyramid of, I'm at the top of that. I need to be in control. I can't show weakness because everybody below me has got to know that I'm in control, And sometimes the perception of talking and letting people know that you're struggling is seen as weakness. And to be able to talk to a complete stranger, you haven't got that fear of judgment.
No.
That you could talk to somebody that you know in a low moment, a weak moment, and potentially feel that they're going to hold that as a judgment on you moving forwards.
I 100% understand that. And I guess that anonymity, it means that, it doesn't matter if it's, your boss from work or the person that you see in the supermarket or whoever it is. And
you'll never know.
No,
you'll never
exactly.
know. And it's one of the beautiful things about it, to be honest, is you do get people who open up a lot more because they know that You don't know them, you don't know their name, we don't have the phone numbers.
Yeah.
It's unless the details are openly given.
Right.
We never know who we're talking to. And I think, again, there's power to that. And I just would like to let people know at this point that service is available. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I am struggling right now, I've got nobody to talk to, you can make that call. Samaritans are available. It's 24/7. So even in the middle of the night, there's somebody there waiting to take that call on 116 123. And it's a really powerful service. So even if it's a 10-minute phone call and you just need somebody to talk to about how you're feeling, make that call rather than not talking to anyone, you know?
Of course. And you know what? It's an amazing thing that you're doing, is spreading that message and spreading the word about this service, because being completely honest with you, I'm sat here now and I wasn't, prior to the conversation we had before we started recording, I probably wasn't even aware of half the things that you told me about Samaritans. And if I'd known what you just told me when I was at the lowest point in my life, that it could have had such a massive impact on my well-being and my mental well-being. And just being able to talk to someone again without feeling like they were going to pass judgment on you or tell you, you kind of lost the plot or something, it could have been an amazing thing for myself. So I hope that there are people that listen to that, and even if there's one person listening to this podcast that picks up on that number,
mate, yeah, just one,
and then this has all been worthwhile.
100%, mate. That's been my view on the whole thing, the whole podcast. If it helps one person, then it was worth it.
Of course.
And that's an observation I've made myself, where I've looked back on the service. And the reason that I'm trying to raise awareness the way that I'm doing this is because myself didn't know. I had preconceptions about Samaritans, one being you had to be at the point of taking your own life to call, literally stood on a bridge or whatever it might be. That's not the case. So we would much rather you call well before that. But again, I had all these preconceptions. I didn't know who was taking the calls. I didn't know whether it was on all these things. I didn't know. So I think having that out there is really powerful. And it'll hopefully provoke more people to engage with the service when they need to.
No, without a shadow of a doubt, it definitely will. Like, I'll have to get this number off you again, and I'll myself I'll happily pass this around and try and spread the word for you, because I think, well, not for you, but for the people who need the service, because a lot of the time when you're backed into that corner, there is that feeling of solitude. You feel alone. You've got no one to talk to, and just that, as silly as it sounds, having that initial conversation, that
just a voice at the end of the phone, mate. Yeah,
like I said, a lot of people don't have that, and even people that feel like they have a support network around them often feel like they can't talk to anyone.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's an amazing service.
It is, mate. Yeah, I mean, I could talk about it for hours, and I'm not going to, because I got you down here today to talk about you. So we're going to try and pull it back to that now, James, because we've gone off piece, haven't we? But it's been great, mate. I think we're on a similar wavelength, and I'm really enjoying the conversation.
Thank you for having me today. It was, like I said, I've done a few bits in the past, and my attitude has always been the same, in that, wherever I've gone in the country to kind of do these recordings or whatever it might be, if one person benefited from me doing that, that's kind of given me that motivation, that get up and go. And
I'm sure somebody will.
And I've had, sometimes you feel like, what am I doing? Is anyone actually benefiting from this? Like, because at the end of the day, I'm not doing this for myself. You know what I mean? I'm genuinely I'm not getting paid to be here. I'm doing it because I care, because I genuinely care. And for me, one of the biggest things, even talking about it makes me feel quite emotional. But like, I've been sat before, and someone who is a friend of a friend, not someone who I'm like massively close with, has kind of private messaged me through Instagram or Facebook or whatever it might be, and said, "Hi mate, I've seen you did this thing, blah blah blah, and actually I've been really struggling, and where would you suggest to go?" And for me, that was kind of like such a light bulb moment, because it made me feel like, you know what, actually this has been for something. This isn't just like,
mate, definitely
just me kind of like,
I can guarantee that somebody will be, relating to something we're saying. And whether that's just enough to provide a little bit of comfort at this point in time, or whether that's enough to get them to pick up the phone, speak to friends, family, whoever it might be, hopefully it will have that impact. It's the whole reason that we're doing this.
And obviously, again, you don't want to... We're talking about these things in kind of like the worst, most extreme terms in the mental health, and people who are at the point of suicide. And this is, this is not where we want people to be. Like, mental health isn't just... This is another problem, is that mental health there's a misconception that it's only relevant when you're at your lowest point. And actually, the way that I like to think about my own mental health is that my mental health is like my life bar in a game of like Tekken, or like an old school
like
arcade game.
Yeah, I like that.
That's your mental health, right? Everyone has mental health, and basically sometimes it will be high, sometimes it will be low, and what's important is to just make sure you're constantly looking at it and seeing the things that trigger you, or like these negative things that happen in your life that don't set you off, and that you let it become too low and it gets beyond the point of recovery. And that's the thing. And I've spoken to people, even people who have had like the best intentions in the world, and I've been speaking to them in this kind of situation, and it's been like, oh, James, but someone like yourself who has mental health. And I'm sat there and I'm thinking,
really?
And I'm like, but bruv, this is the whole problem, is you don't understand. Like,
everyone
and nobody
has
like
mental health.
Everyone has mental health. It's the same as everyone has physical health. And the thing is, we just, we're conditioned to not think of our own mental health in the same way that we think of our physical health. But again, if you're ill, if you've broken your leg, the first port of call is the doctors. Whereas even people who are right now struggling with their mental health won't necessarily go through the channels that they know are there. Sometimes a lot of people don't know that the channels are there, but they won't go in search of these channels because they have that fear of people thinking a certain type of way of them or whatever. And really, we need to start changing the way that people view that, because everyone has mental health in the same way that they have physical health, and it's equally as important. There's no point going to the gym 6 times a week and your head being absolutely fried. Like, you can't be the best version of yourself if that's the way you're operating. You need to do things in equal measure. You need to look after your mental health the same way that you look after physical health.
Really well said. I'm completely with you on that. And I think we'll all know somebody, but you have lads, you have, and it's not just lads as well. Obviously, it's women, it's tradespeople. The women are playing a much bigger part in the trades, and that's great, and it's only going up. Going off subject slightly, but I'm morbidly, I guess, interested to see, with the increase in females coming into construction, whether the mental health and people taking their own life, whether the statistics will match. Do you know what I'm getting at? Rather than, because it's heavily weighted, I think about 83% of people in construction are male,
right?
And the female element, realistically, at the moment, are more admin than on the tools, but that is changing, which is great to see. But I'm morbidly curious as to whether the situation with mental health will affect men and women equally. But to retrack back to what you were saying before, I've had this sort of idea on it for a long time, where mental health should be seen exactly like physical health. So you go to the gym to train your body. If you don't train your mind, it's going to become unfit.
Of course.
And if your mind is unfit, then training your body is useless.
Which is why, when as children we're sent to school, so that our minds can develop and that they can grow, and they're not just idle. And the sad thing is that we're taught a lot of great things academically at school, but what we're not taught at school is how to look after our mental well-being.
Yeah, look, mate, we could do a whole podcast on that, James. I'm going to have to rebook you in, mate. We're going to have to do a few of
Part
these.
2 coming right up.
That's it, yeah. At this point, mate, I'm going to pull it back to you.
Yeah,
I'm going to pull it back to you, because I keep trying to do this.
No,
we keep going
worry.
off. It's fantastic content.
Yeah.
But, so we'll go back, mate. You've done your apprenticeship. Yeah. You've started up in business. Now, I've done a little dive into you, so I know a few bits. I've listened to your other podcast. I'll give that a shout out, actually, mate, because I listened to you on the MYH podcast?
With
yeah,
Rob, yeah.
That's it. I'll be honest, I only came across this a couple of weeks ago. I didn't know it existed, but obviously after starting this in a bit of a whirlwind, it's come my way. So Rob's doing a great job.
Yeah, shout outs to Rob.
Absolutely, man.
And we won't go off topic, but, you know, one thing I will just say quickly is, unfortunately, in this kind of line of work, there are a lot of people who I feel, through my own experiences, do stuff not exactly with an ulterior motive, but they do it and that nothing really comes from it. And I feel Rob is one of the people that I know personally, one of the few people who is really pushing the right message, helping people and getting people who need help to the right places. And so, you know, big up Rob, do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I don't know him personally. Hopefully at some point our paths will cross. Maybe we can do something together, Rob. Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. I did actually, when I came across his account, I actually sent him a message and said, just come across your account. It's fantastic. I'm setting up a podcast myself. I think the more of this out there, the better.
Yeah.
You know, the more avenues, the more people raising awareness. I'm all for that. There's no competing in this. This is
exactly
a team sport.
Do you know what? This is my favourite thing about this, right? Because it doesn't matter whether you're representing this podcast, whether you're representing Samaritans, whether I'm representing, shout out to Coventry and Warwickshire Mine. It doesn't matter who you're representing. If your intentions are right, whatever banner that you do it under, the message is the same, right? And so we are all doing it for the same cause. Do you know what I mean?
100%, mate. It's all to help, isn't it? You know, we're trying to raise the message, raise awareness. And the more people doing that, fantastic. You know, another 15 podcasts pop up, brilliant. You know, the more people talking and seeing this, fantastic. Getting back to you. We're going to try again. So getting back to you, mate, like I said, I do know a little bit. And I know throughout your business journey, there came a point where obviously you hit your struggles yourself. Are you okay talking about that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's something that, you know, again, I talk about very openly because I don't feel like, how am I going to sit here and I want to tell you to do X, Y, and Z and me not observe the same thing. So in order to do so, you know, I've laid myself bare many a time and I don't have any problem in doing so because I feel like through doing that, potentially, again, you know, I mean, hopefully there might be one person that's listening and just think, you know what, this lad, nothing special about him. You know, if he can do it, then I can do it. And that is the thing, that is the message. Anyone listening, like, your mental health is valuable, and whatever you can do to protect that, that is, you know, that should be your main priority. And coming from my own experience, you know, I was very tunnel vision in my approach for years and years and years, in that all I wanted to do was grow the business. I wanted to channel everything into the business, and that was kind of not my sole priority, because I've had children and whatever else, but it was probably my main priority, even over my children, which is, again, you know, looking back, it does make me feel not great about myself, but and to cut a long story short, I got to a point where my relationship with my children's mum had broken down, and I was then, you know, I've got a place by myself, and you know, at the time I was training every day. You know, I was working with a personal trainer. I was
training in the gym.
But again, you know, until this point, I'd never addressed mental health. It wasn't something that I was, you know, I think there's this thing of kind of like, well, you know, it's never happened to me, so it can't really be a real thing. Do you know what I mean? And so that is why I do try and kind of push this message now, because I
know exactly what you mean.
Try and make people aware that, like, you know, again, as horrible as this sounds, you are like one decision away, one, like, you know, relationship breakdown, or one couple of missed mortgage payments or something away from a full-on mental breakdown. And when that happens, you need to learn to be able to cope with that, and know that there are people out there who will support you through that. But going back to myself, I was training all the time. I was working, going out in the evenings, you know, drinking into the night, not looking after myself, you know, as much as I was, you know, training in the gym, it didn't really matter, because I wasn't looking after myself in the way that I should have.
Yeah.
And it kind of just got to the point where, you know, people say burning the candle at both ends. I was just pushing and pushing and pushing. And what ended up happening was my body just effectively cut out, and I was at work, and thank God, touch wood, I was at work with all the lads at the time, because had I been on my own, God knows what would have happened. But I effectively just blacked out. I was completely
passed out.
So effectively, blacked out. And I don't know, still to this day, there's not really been a lot of medical answers to say what happened first or whatever. But either I fell over, because I was on concrete, so I was outside at the time. And again, luckily, it happened when it did, because if it happened 10 minutes earlier, I would have been at the top of a 3-story scaffold. So if I'd fallen off that, chances are I wouldn't be here now.
Yeah.
But touch wood, I was on ground level. I'd just come down the scaffold. We were talking about going around the corner to get a drink. It was break time. And that's kind of the last of what I remember. I blacked out, fell backwards onto the concrete, smashed my head on the floor, and I dislodged, I think, 2 of my vertebrae in my back, bruised my pelvis, bruised my coccyx.
Just from a static fall?
Yeah, from being stood upright on tarmac. This is, and basically, obviously, because when you go completely dead weight, you don't brace yourself. So my head's just gone bang against the floor, smashed all the back of my head up, and then again, chicken the egg. I don't know what came first, but I ended up having a seizure. So I don't know whether the seizure caused the fall or me hitting my head on the concrete caused me to have a seizure. But I've then effectively had a fit on the floor and bitten like a load of my tongue off and stuff like that. And obviously, I've never had any sort of previous medical.
Nothing to
There's
indicate
nothing like
that.
to say, like,
I mean, just to rewind slightly, in the build up to that, you're burning the candle at both ends, you're training, you're going out, you're doing all that stuff. Were there any, like, now looking back now as you see it, were there warning signs?
Well, I mean, there probably were, but I probably just ignored them because you just push forward and you think, and like, I'm not being funny, but I was, what did I expect? I do think that sometimes now. I think, you were going out, you could be drinking till whatever time. Sometimes we'd end up in like a lock-in environment kind of thing, and it was like 3 a.m, and then and then the next thing, it's basically going home for a couple of hours, having a couple of hours sleep, getting up at like 6:30 or whatever, going to work, and it's like, what was I playing at? I wasn't looking after myself. Like,
and the thing is, when you're doing that, mate, because I've been there, I've done that. The environment I was in, I don't know about you, but you almost get applauded for it. It's like, what a lad. What a lad.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, out till 3 again, were you?
And and I look back at it now and I just think, what an idiot. What, like, and I wasn't looking after myself, and I probably was aware of the fact that I wasn't looking after myself. But did I take any notice? No, I didn't. And anyway, so I ended up having the fall, and basically from there, I lost a lot of my short-term memory. So when I sort of came to, I was then in the back of an ambulance, and I didn't really know what was going on, and they were asking me questions, and I didn't even know the answers. Like, I had my long-term memory. I could tell them what had happened, in the past, but they were asking me questions about my current, like my current relationship status. I woke up and I didn't even remember that me and my kid's mother hadn't been together for like a year.
Wow.
I didn't know that, they asked me about the job we were working on. It was actually the last day of the job. We were only there to do like a little bit of glossing and a bit of tidying up and stuff. And they were like, how much longer? And I was like, oh, we got a few weeks left on this yet, blah, blah, blah. And it just completely wiped my memory. And so there was quite a big knock-on effect physically, but mentally the knock-on effect for me was I was at home, not earning money, with quite ill physical health. And there's a certain amount of financial pressure, where, when you work for yourself, there's that pressure. When you have people working for you, that pressure is even more magnified, because no matter what happens, these lads have got to be paid. They've got to have work. It's not like I could just be like...
How many lads did you have on at the time?
6.
So there was you, 6. Am I right to think, did you say you'd split up with your
kid's mum? Yeah.
Yeah, so you've got your own place, but no doubt you're still paying for your kids.
Yeah.
So you've got all that pressure on top of you of being again at the top of the pyramid. So there's no support for you.
No. And it didn't take long for me to get into a really dark place, because again, the kind of lifestyle, we live, we you're never really sat still for very long. You know what I mean? You're always on the go. You're always doing something. You said about, this year you've worked right up to Christmas and you've had a couple of days off and then back at it again. And that's quite, in this sort of line of work, is quite normal. And it's normal to push yourself beyond where you should push yourself.
It is, and unfortunately, it's another thing that I'd like to sort of raise is there's almost like a community where that kind of behaviour is glorified.
Yeah,
up the Saturday workers, who's in on a Sunday, and I look at those posts and I think, fair play for doing it, and don't get me wrong, everyone's got to do it, and I think if you do it now and again, or it's for a goal, you've got a holiday to pay for or a bill to pay, absolutely great. But there's this weird glorification of, let's all work crazy hours, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
It's really unhealthy.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think, again, it's a bit of a cliche, but you've got to live in a way that you remember that you're working to live, not living to work. You can't just spend your whole time in work and neglect all the people around you. And so I think when I was in that situation where I hadn't had a lot of time off probably ever, and then suddenly I'm at home unable to leave the house. And again, there's probably a lot of demons that for whatever reason I'd never faced throughout my whole life, because I'd never learned to. I just kind of swept it under the rug, not dealt with them, and now suddenly I'm at home for 3 months, can't do anything. I'm under a lot of pressure, and it's like
sat with your own
just
thoughts.
Really, that's when the floodgates were just like, basically, boom.
So,
you've got to deal with all.
So, just how long did the memory situation? How long did that last?
I think probably the memory stuff probably only lasted a couple of days, and it was kind of the lads at work that were kind of told me afterwards, because I didn't even remember having these conversations, but they were like, you basically, they were asking you about your relationship, and I was like, oh yeah, my missus is at home and blah blah blah, and really we hadn't been together for like over a year.
Jesus Christ!
And it's that was one of the knock-on effects, but the physical was.
I was just trying to get to the point that obviously, with things like memory, obviously that's your mind, it's your brain. Something's happened there, and yet you're still having to run a business. So you're still having to organise jobs, pay the lads, get them. I mean, how was that going? Were you still having to send them out, or did you delegate that to somebody else?
Like the way, again, I would like to just say as well, like I am fortunate, and I'm under no like disillusion that, like I'm, like some like prophet of God. Like I am lucky that I have the people around me that I have, because had I not have had those people, then I don't think I would be here now. And I am very fortunate to have, the lads that work for me. Obviously, I trust them with my life. You know what I mean? I have trusted them with my life on several occasions.
Yeah.
But, had I not had these lads around me, then, things might have been very different. And, like you were saying, you have a certain amount of jobs that you have booked in, and perhaps we had 3 months, 4 months already in the diary. So to some extent, I was able to kind of not be too heavily involved in the day-to-day, and they were able to kind of be self-sufficient for a period of time with very little intervention. So yes, I was still in charge, and I was still making sure that everyone was paid, but I wasn't in a position where I had to be on site every day telling people what to do and watching over people, because I couldn't trust them, because again, I do trust them.
That, I mean, you are fortunate for that, for sure. That's something throughout my business life I've struggled with. Hands up, I struggle to release control. So in that position, my anxiety would have gone through the roof. But
I think it does naturally. Like I think again, my anxiety did, because like you do what's called catastrophize. You tend to think of the worst scenarios, and you think, oh God, and in reality, there's a lot of people around you that you can trust, and you can, things aren't as bad as what you think. But especially when you run your own business, you do tend to think of the worst case scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. So at this point then, so you're at home on your own for 3 months?
Yes. And my mental well-being was just like the lowest it had ever been. I think there's probably a lot of stuff that I probably hadn't really thought about, hadn't addressed, a lot of things that I'd probably swept under the carpet. And then this kind of situation, it just forced me to reflect on a lot of stuff including what was going on. Obviously, that was the main factor at the time, but what was going on in sort of my current situation, and this kind of self-doubt and this thinking like, how can I, like, I've got families who are dependent on me, and I'm here, I can't even get off the sofa, and just thinking, what, and as horrible as it sounds, I ended up being in a situation where I just thought, what, I'd be better off dead. I'd be better off if I wasn't here, if these people didn't have that burden of me,
you got to that point,
me being here. And I look back at that now and I think, I feel quite ashamed of that, because not from any point of view of people shouldn't feel like that, but from my children's point of view, like if I wasn't there, and if I'd ended it then, my children would have grown up without a dad. But again, it is worth saying that when you are in those like grasps of depression, you are living in kind of like an alternate reality, and things aren't always as straightforward as how you or I could, reflect on this right now and say, this is the rational thing, this is the rational answer. When you're like that, sometimes you just, the desperation takes over, and you just think, what, all these people, they're all reliant on me, and I'm just, like, I'm an imposter, I can't even look after myself, and it's hard to think about it.
But I think there's a little misconception, isn't there, where, particularly around men with kids, I think, where they take their own life, and there's always somebody out there that will go, that was selfish.
Yeah.
And the reality is, and we were talking about this before, your reality is in your mind, and whatever it is at that time, that is your reality. So if you genuinely believe that everybody around you would be better off without you there, that's your reality. And the rational side where you go, well, no, they won't be. Your kids are going to grow up without their dad. Your partner's going to have no support. And all these rational thoughts are just not there, are they?
No, they're not. And, people do queue up to say stuff like that. And I've heard that so many times, like, suicide is selfish.
I've heard it. I've heard it myself,
And, I'm telling you, like, when, for me, when I was in that situation, it's not that you don't care about other people. It's, how can you function when you don't care about yourself? Do you understand what I'm saying? And to then sort of like criticize someone, and say that you're selfish, or that you're, any kind of type of way, that's so counterproductive to someone, because someone's already feeling low, like they don't need you to kind of criticize.
Well, James, it's another barrier to communication, isn't it? So if that, unfortunately, that stigma's out there, and you think, well, hold on, if I turn around and I say to my friends or family, I'm feeling this bad, I'm considering taking my own life, and I think the world would be better without me, and you're thinking, well, they're going to think I'm selfish because they know I've got kids or commitments. It's another barrier to communication where you're not going to have that conversation. So I think that is another thing that needs addressing, really, when it comes to people that take their own lives, and that stigma of it being a selfish action. I can't see any way how it can be seen as selfish. I really can't, personally. When you evaluate the position that somebody's in to come to that decision,
it's just pure desperation. That's
absolutely
pure desperation. Yeah. And again, logic doesn't always have a say in these kind of things.
How long were you feeling that way?
I mean, I've got to be honest with you. As soon as I, being off work, being forced to be off work was very, very unnatural to me. So, you think back against your whole working career and how much time you've had off probably in the past 10 years, being forced to sit at home alone, not doing anything for kind of probably like 3 weeks, 4 weeks is enough to kind of have a real negative impact on your thought process. And it was very quickly started to become this thing of like, I can't do this. It's not that you're setting out to hurt someone else, or I don't know. It's quite hard to quantify the thought process behind it, but you can become in a situation where you're not thinking about you're not thinking about your own well-being. You're not thinking, and do you know what? Sometimes the signs of this in other people can be they're so small, but they are so profound, and it's just down to stuff like not taking care of yourself, not getting up and having a wash and getting ready for the day, and that can be a sign that someone has already started to become depressed.
And often there are no signs, and unfortunately it's only after something tragic happens that people look back and go, oh, that was a bit off. You know. So yeah, you do have to pay attention to the small things for sure. I mean, with yourself, I mean, how, if you don't mind me asking, because I certainly don't want to push too far, but how dark did it get? Like when it comes to thoughts, was there a plan or?
Yeah, well, I'm quite open in saying that. Like I basically planned the way that I was going to take my own life, and you know, I kind of woke up in that kind of loop, that Groundhog Day, just doing the same thing again and again every day, not doing anything really, and it'd be like, today's going to be the day, and then something might happen, and like, again, I'm fortunate in that I have people around me who, you know, just turned up randomly, or like, and then you're like, oh well, I'm not going to do it today because so and so turned up with a pack of biscuits and said, oh well, you know, and so like, and so I'd planned in my head exactly how I was going to do it, and the way that I was going to do it, there wouldn't have been a comeback from it. So perhaps in my own mind, perhaps I was like reluctant and I didn't jump straight into it. But that's not to say that it was there ever present in my mind, thinking that today is going to be the day that I do it. And again, I spoke about this before, but you know, someone can kind of like disrupt your thought process, even with like a phone call, or and you think, oh well, now I've got to sort. And as mad as it sounds, there's no like rational. So like, someone calls up and says, oh, you know, your council tax is overdue, and you're like, oh bloody hell, now I'm gonna have to sort this out. So now that's like thrown you off what you were doing this morning. This morning you was gonna, you know, you're gonna end your life, but now someone's annoyed you because you've got to sort out your council tax.
Thank God for council tax.
But you know what I'm saying? It's like it's not really a rational path of, you know, illness or healing. It's kind of like you dip in and out, and sometimes things can distract you, and even like, you know, looking back again, we can laugh and we can be grateful for like these things now, but you know, I mean, imagine if I didn't have these little distractions and I didn't have people who just kind of turned up at my house, and then you're annoyed at the postman because he's come and knocked the door, but then you sat there like basically preparing to end your own life, and it's like, it's not, you know, it's hard to think about.
I think I'm sure it is, and I'm sure it feels completely alien to you looking backwards now.
It does, because it doesn't feel like, it almost feels like, you know, people talk about like an out of body experience or something. Like I can remember that, but that person there is not the person that I am now. It's not the person that's sat here now. And so like talking about it does seem weird, because I wouldn't behave like that. I don't do that kind of stuff. But when you're trapped in that cycle of like depression and you know, feeling suicidal, like there is no up and down. Everything is kind of an alternate reality.
I think what you've just said as well just highlights the importance of those small acts. You know, if you're worried about somebody and you think that there's signs or they're having a hard time, because, you know, there are some big signs. If somebody's gone through a relationship breakdown, everybody tends to know there's some big signs. They might be out partying and looking like they're enjoying themselves, but a lot of the time that's a mask. I did that. But the little small gestures, like the phone call, the cup of tea, the little check-in, can really make a massive difference.
It can. And this goes back to what you're saying about listening and you know, being there for the people that are around you, because especially when you know that people are going through a tough time. I don't want anyone that I come into contact with. I'm, like I said before, I'm like a bit of an emotional sponge. Like when I'm around a lot of sadness, like I find it hard not to take on that sadness, in like an empathetic sadness myself. And so everyone around me, like I want everyone to be happy and I want everyone to succeed. And I don't want, especially knowing how that feels, I feel like coming through the other side of it, I don't want anyone to feel that way. And I, you know, like, and like you said, thank God that I had those people. Thank God that I had these little distractions that kept me away from doing what I'd planned to do, because there's a lot of people out there who don't have people, and so it must be so much harder for them.
Absolutely, mate. I mean, and that's where the services come in, isn't it? For the people that have nobody, the likes of your Samaritans and your Lighthouse company, Lighthouse and charities like that, to hopefully just make that small difference that could potentially change the course of somebody's decision.
Exactly.
And I mean, like you just said there, so you came out of that. What was the turning point for you? What happened, or what was the
I was
moment?
really fortunate in that I was able to access like a counselling service.
So you recognised where you were?
Yeah, so someone that I'm close to basically said, you need to go and...
Somebody else recognised where you were? Okay.
Someone said to me, basically like, and I think looking back, if I'm completely honest with you, I think perhaps this is why people were, turning up and announced, and my mum and dad were materialising because everyone could tell that I wasn't all right, and that like I wasn't myself, and that I was just on kind of autopilot. I was like a zombie at the time, and so someone suggested to me, like, you need to go and do this. You need to go and talk, and I can basically point you in this direction. And had that not have happened, like I recognise 100%. Had that not have happened, like I probably wouldn't be sat here. Do you know what I mean? So like, that's why if I can say that and I can push that onto the next person,
gotcha.
It's the like the cumulative cycle of like pushing it down and everyone benefiting from that knowledge,
paying it forward.
Exactly. And so I went through like a counselling program, and
was that? Do you mind me asking, what was that counselling? Was that private, or was that, what sort of counselling was that?
So I was actually really lucky in that I was able to access like an emergency line to speak to someone, and then I think they assessed that I was in need of speaking to somebody else. So I spoke to someone. It was actually sort of like it wasn't a private service. It was, I imagine, council funded.
Yeah.
So
I think it's important, you see, to talk about these things if you can, because people a lot of the time just don't understand the process. It's well, if I do make that call, what will happen? And there's also a worry sometimes that if people are feeling like they're having suicidal thoughts, that if they ring somebody and say, look, I'm feeling suicidal, that actually the men are going to come along, put them in a straitjacket and whisk them away.
Yeah, but you know what? These people at the other end of the phone, like yourself, doing the Samaritans, there's nothing that you can say which is going to shock that person, because they've heard it 1,000 times over, probably that day.
Yeah.
So like, the whole thing of being like judged, and obviously that's a massive factor in why people don't approach getting help for their mental health. But don't be put off by thinking that people are going to judge you or think of you a certain type of way, because this is what people do on a day in and day out.
And so thankfully you got the help that you needed at that point through counselling. And how long did it take to sort of pull you back to a good place?
I mean, I ended up going back to work before I finished my counselling. So I was doing my counselling and I kept up with it. I couldn't tell you now, a few years down the line, exactly how many weeks or how long it was. But what I can tell you is what a profound effect it had on my life. And if I hadn't have had that person to talk to reach out to help you rationalise your thoughts and quantify what's going on in your head, like, there's no doubt in my mind that I wouldn't be sat here now. So everyone I talk to, if you're struggling, even if you're not struggling, right, at some point in your life, try and have some sort of counselling and try and talk to somebody about your thought processes and stuff like that, because it didn't just save my life at the time, it changed my thought processes moving forwards.
Yeah. I'm glad you've said that, mate, because one of the things I was going to say was, would you consider do you still do counselling? Would you consider doing it moving forwards now?
Yeah, I would do. Yeah, and it's not something that I'm active in at the minute. I'm not doing any form of counselling. However, again, one of the things that I've gone into the new year thinking is, it's good to have someone to talk to and to kind of go forwards. Maybe perhaps not in a counselling point of view, but I'm going into the new year hopefully with a coach, and I'm going to start a coaching program. And that's is because I feel like, like, I can't be the best version of myself for other people.
Do you know what, mate?
If I'm not going to
a lot of coaches, are virtually counsellors anyway, aren't they? And it's mindset. And if you adjust your mindset, effectively, that's therapy.
Yeah.
So anything, I believe, is positive when it comes to working on yourself and your mind and your thought process. And the reason I ask that is I'm actually really interested in counselling. I personally went down a very different avenue and I struggled. I went into education, so I sought knowledge and the science and the practicalities, and then I went down a rabbit hole. But that was how I dealt with my issues, was educating myself. And I've often thought, and again, it comes down to that time and looking after yourself thing, that I would actually love to do counselling.
Yeah.
Just to see what's there, and because in my mind, it's a little bit like going to the gym. You know, if you train more, you're going to become fitter.
Exactly.
So in my mind, if I went for counselling and made a tweak here and there, I could become again the best version of me that was available.
It's like a savings account. It's like you keep paying into it, and eventually,
love that,
you're going to have something there that's worth having. You know what I mean?
And that's the thing, isn't it? With the stigma of mental health, is it's almost like if you put it out there that you want to work on your mental health, or you tell people I'm going to counselling, the initial response is, "Oh, what's wrong with you?"
But if you told them he was going to a personal trainer, if I said to someone tomorrow I'm starting with a new personal trainer, they wouldn't be like, "Oh, well, you've put a bit of weight on over Christmas.
Exactly, yeah.
Got a bit of a fat gut there."
Exactly.
You know, you'd just be like, "Oh, cool, yeah, well done." But when you say it in regards to your mental well-being, people are like, "Oh, have you been?
Are you mentally ill?" Yeah. And I think that's, again, one of the things, talk about it more. We can get that message out there that I certainly wouldn't react like that. And if one of my friends were to turn around to me and say, I'm having counselling, I'd actually be intrigued. I'd be like, fantastic. Are they any good? Can you pass on the details? That's great. You know, brilliant. And I think if we as a society can lean more towards that and stop with the stigmatisation and the preconceptions and all the old-fashioned values around mental health, then it'll be a huge, huge positive step for everybody.
100%.
You know? And the good thing now, mate, what I want to move to, so obviously you've had that time, you've had counselling, you've pulled yourself out of it. And the light at the end of the tunnel that I think, again, is important to tell people. Now, again, I've done my little deep dive on you. I know a few bits and pieces. So last year, it's not that deep, James, don't worry, I haven't actually spent that much time. It's on your Instagram bio. So last year, mate, or consecutively, so runner-up for Painter and Decorator of the Year for On the Tools 2022.
Yep, that's correct.
Winner for 2023.
Yep.
And also a massive one for me, mate, which I was like, put a smile on my face, was the Purdy Mentor of the Year for 2023.
That's correct.
Because again, I think that's huge. But let's pull things. So you've gone through the shit.
Yeah.
You've got yourself in a better place, and now things are doing pretty well, yeah?
Yeah, and you know what? This is... It makes everything sweeter, because I think, you know, every day to me is like I've said it before and it sounds cliche, but it's the truth, is that every day is like a bonus day, because basically if I had have, you know, finished, you know, ended my own life, none of this would have ever happened. And so this is just a sign to me that I feel like none of these things would have been achieved had I have killed myself in 2021. Yeah. You know what I mean? None of this would have happened. And yeah, all these are great. These are great achievements. You know, runner up 22, winner 23, Purdy Mentor of the Year. I think that's an amazing thing, because that's recognising the help that I've given to the next generation.
That is an amazing thing
of lads that are coming into our trade. But another thing that I hold probably even dearer than all of that is that I was fortunate enough to be invited to become an ambassador for Coventry and Warwickshire Mind, which is, it means, you know, I've sought out these people and I've tried to put back into the system. But it means that, you know, however many, you know, 3 years down the line or whatever it is now, 2.5 years down the line, I can now try and pay back into the system, and I can now try and help the person that's in that position that I was 3 years ago. And that makes me feel like on top of the world, you know.
Well, mate, it's fantastic that you're doing that. And you know, I'll just put it out there that as soon as I message you, you reached out to me and were mate, I'll come on your podcast straight away. You were there offering to do that, and I think your story of hitting those achievements, because, don't gloss over the fact that you've won Painter and Decorator of the Year, because that's a personal achievement for you and your business. But look what you've achieved from the position you were in, from the depths you were at. And I know it's personal to you that it's your achievement, but also you're flying the flag for anyone that has been there to say, do you know what? It can get better. With the right steps and the right support, my life can get back on track.
Yeah, and I think that's the takeaway message that anyone could take away, is that, like, I've heard this put in lots of different ways, but often it's, it's darkest just before the light, and I've heard it put in a lot of different ways. But you never know what's just around the corner, and you can try and do something 100 times and it not work, and then 101 times it works. And so don't give up, because you never know how close you are to getting where you want to be. And that doesn't just go in terms of, financial goals or your work life. But if you give up now, there's so many things ahead of you that then you're taking away the possibility of that even happening.
But one day can make a difference, can't it?
Yeah, of course.
1 day, 1 hour. And a lot of the time when you're in that depth of despair, just focus on an hour or half an hour, a minute, just let's do another minute. Let's do another half an hour. Let's do another hour and see where you are after that. But I think you're personally like a shining star at the end of what you've been through.
Thank you, I appreciate
to
that.
Then come out, put your message out there, put your story out there, open yourself up, which is a fucking massive thing to do, mate. And then to have the accolades behind you that you've achieved over the last year or two, that to me should show anybody that's listening who's thinking things can't get better, this is it for me. James has been there, and he's sat there now talking about this with those accolades behind him, helping people out now, Mentor of the Year, which again, mate, I touched on that at the very beginning of the podcast, where we were talking about the fact that the sort of like responsibility that you're passing on now to the younger generation. And now, you've had your efforts acknowledged there. And let's talk about Mind. So, I'll give you this sort of opportunity and platform to talk about what Mind do, what you do for them.
Yeah.
And
again, I've just got to say that I'm an ambassador for Coventry and Warwickshire Mind. Mind as an organisation is made up of, I think, about 53 different kind of legions across the country. So they are independent to one another, although as a whole they make up Mind as a national charity. So I'm kind of a representative of my local branch, effectively. And my kind of ambassador role is raising awareness, really. We do, events where we do a bit of fundraising, stuff like that. It's not kind of like standing there shaking a tin in someone's face going, come on, give me your money. But it's like, we're on a stall, we've got leaflets, we're handing out information, and there might be someone that goes, you know what, I appreciate what you're doing, they slip a £5 in the box or whatever it might be that they can afford. And it's, again, is just, all I'm doing is giving up a bit of my free time to then kind of, like you said, pay forward to the next person and to try and raise awareness, because people still have this misconception and people don't really understand mental health. And so, Mind as a charity, that is, as well as helping people physically, there's a lot of channels that, if you were to go on the Mind website right now, there's lots of different, sectors. If you're struggling with a certain, bipolar or whatever it might be, but also it's just on the ground in people's faces, pushing information and trying to raise awareness, because it's still so misunderstood.
And I think it's important to say that, isn't it, that these charities, the likes of Mind, are not funded by the government. No. So those donations are really important.
Of course.
And to have that service, and the way that I look at it myself is, even if I'm in a position where I think I'm not going to need them, so I don't need to get involved, is look around you. You'll have a family member that's male. You'll have a Mind, I guess, anybody. Yeah. Okay, so I got sidetracked with the male construction thing, but if you look around you, you'll look at your family, look at your friends. wouldn't you want that service to be there if they need it?
Yeah, of course.
If somebody needs it around you. And that's the view I take on a lot of things is, well, even if I don't think, and, I'm in a position where I think I'm not going to need that service, I hope it's there for somebody that I love that might need it.
Exactly.
So it's really important to give you support. And if you can, give donations to these local organisations, the likes of Mind, Samaritans, Lighthouse, all these various, give them your support, basically. And even if you can't contribute financially, just raise awareness, give them a like, a follow.
Well, you know what? It's not got to be money. It's not got to be financial. Even, you could share something on Instagram.
So
it
easy.
takes 2 seconds
exactly
to
that,
share
mate.
a post to your story.
Yeah.
And, what's that going to cost you? It's cost you nothing. But in reality, it could get to someone, one of your friends could be feeling that kind of way and they don't know where to go. And just by you sharing that post, that could have a massive impact. So, just keep spreading the word and keep, making people aware that there are people out there that care and they will help.
That's it, mate. There are varying levels, aren't there? And you really don't have to do a lot to make a big difference.
No.
And if everybody did a very small amount, it would make a huge difference to the country and society. And yeah, you can go right down a rabbit hole on that. If everybody's mental health was better, less pressure on the NHS. There's, again, you could have a whole podcast just on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the general message is help out if you can. So how long have you been doing Bits for Mind?
So I have been doing it for about a year now, I think. I think it was about, just short of a year. So again, I kind of pieced my life back together. And then my next kind of reaction was to kind of, I can't think of a way of putting it, but basically seek out ways in which I could then pay back from the services that I had benefited from.
So you used Mind yourself?
So the organisation that I used wasn't actually Mind, but Mind, again, it doesn't matter what banner it's done under. It's basically helping people who need it most. So Mind is probably one of the bigger organisations in my local area.
Yeah.
That might not be the same for everybody in their particular area, but I know for a fact I've seen the work that's being done, and I know where a lot of that money's going and where the funding's going to kind of be pushed back into local communities of people that need the help the most. And so of course I thought that was like an amazing thing, and if I could benefit them in whatever way I could, just by standing here and going, here's a leaflet and take this, and it's not always got to be that, but it's just trying to raise awareness and trying to be a face for an organisation or whatever it is, whatever they decide that they need me for. I will do that, and I will do that gladly.
Mate, that's really noble. It really is. And it's the reason that I got involved with Samaritans. My circle of mates, I haven't really asked them, to be honest, what they think of it, but would probably have all been very surprised.
Yeah.
Because I was your typical bloke, your typical lad. Played football most of my life and all that kind of thing. Beers in the pub. But the reason I'm bringing this up is not to bring it back to me. It's just to say that working for these charities and doing these things, my take from it is it gives me a sense of purpose, that I'm paying back, that I'm helping out, and it's actually lovely to do that without being focused on business and money.
Yeah.
And to have a purpose in life that doesn't revolve around finances, I've found really refreshing personally. So,
and also, it's an eye-opener, because all these services, like the way that these things are operated is there is, like we talk about stigma and we talk about discrimination and whatever else, and there is none of that. There is no, it doesn't matter what sexuality you are, what religion you are, what creed you are. It's everyone is treated the same and everyone gets the same level of help, and that is the way it should be.
100%, mate. 100%. At this point, mate, I think we've done an hour and a half, so we're not quite at Joe Rogan levels. But to be fair, mate, honestly, I think that we've got so much we could talk about, and I'll definitely get you back on at another point, and we'll get something directional, and we'll do another podcast. At this point, James, where can everybody find you?
Well, hopefully, hopefully you don't follow me home, but you can follow me on Instagram at Royal Spa Decoration. And yeah, I mean, big up Coventry and Warwickshire Mine, big up the Samaritans, and big up yourself for doing all this, because without people like you, the message is lost, isn't it? So.
I really appreciate that, mate. Thank you. And yeah, from the sake of the podcast, if you've enjoyed this episode, if you've taken anything from it, please give it a like, a follow, a subscribe. If you can reshare anything we post on any of the platforms, the podcast's going to be promoted over Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. We're trying to get it everywhere. So anything you can do, a like, a follow, a share, does make a difference. The comments that I'm getting, to be fair, we've had an overwhelming response, so I'd like to say thank you for that already. The comments do make a difference. It makes me realise that, I'm doing something right, because I've got huge imposter syndrome at myself as to why the hell does anyone get to listen to me? But yeah, any help that you can in terms of liking, following, subscribing, it does make a difference. So hit those like, follow, share buttons, and thanks for listening.
Well, thank you.
No problem, mate. Pleasure.